Mind State Day. This is a very, very important part of the practice, but we have to have, as I had said, some grounding in working with sensations before we're capable of working with mind states. This term, mind state, covers quite a wide range of our experiences. It includes emotions, moods, mental sets, states of consciousness. There's a way that we can understand it that makes it easy to see how all of these things are covered by this one term. We can think of a mind state as a coloration of our consciousness. A mind state is like colored lenses through which we look at everything that we experience. A very simple example. If you are angry, all of your experience when you're in that state of anger is colored by the presence of that anger. If you are sleepy, everything you experience is colored by the presence of the sleepiness. If you're feeling a deep joy, everything you experience is colored by that joy. So a very simple way to understand a mind state is it's a coloration on our mind. It's a coloration of our experience. And anything that puts that coloration on our experience then falls under this rubric of mind state. It covers a lot of things that we might not immediately think of being covered. Just a sense of stillness is a mind state. An attitude of expecting or anticipating is a mind state. That anticipation is part of, I referred to notice the difference when you're walking to the cafeteria as when you're doing walking practice, that little, you can even feel it physically sometimes, that little pull forward when you're walking toward a goal. There's an expectation in the mind, and it has its physical manifestation in a subtle little sense of forward pulling that we can feel. Now these mind states, these colorations on our experience, all have bodily concomitants. Some of them are very, very subtle. The bodily concomitant of something like deep peace may be hard to experience, whereas the bodily component of something like anxiety we can usually be quite easily aware of. There'll be a more rapid, there'll be pounding in the chest, there may be sweating that we're aware of, or trembling. So the body part of mind states varies in how easy it is to pick up, but just know that it's there for all of our mind states. We function as a unit with regard to that. And very often, when some of our hidden issues, our buried issues that start to surface and come up for healing in the practice come up, we'll be very aware of the movement between body experiences and sometimes other sensory experiences, because I said we communicate to ourselves through these other senses too, and mind state. They go back and forth and back and forth. You may recall a few nights ago I told you that I actually became able to map places in my body where there seemed to be a particular packing in of certain issues. And then often the surfacing of that issue can start with tension or pain in that part of the body too. And then there's the emotion, and then there's the other concomitants of the emotion that go with it. The interconnectedness of how our being functions when our various issues start shaking loose for the purifying is an incredibly delicate operation. How we work with mind states is a little different than what we've been doing so far. Part of it is the same. If we become aware of a mind state, we note the mind state with the best word we can find to grasp its feel. Some are easy, like anxiety, anger, annoyance, resentment. Or on the other side, peace, joy, stillness. Although sometimes peace, joy, and stillness can be so subtle that we're hardly aware that we're experiencing them. Some mind states will have a fairly abrupt onset, and it's fairly easy to see the beginning of them, but most mind states creep in very slowly. A large part of many people's management of their lives is that they're not aware that an emotion is starting to develop in them until they're smack dab in the middle of it, being pulled and pushed around by the emotion. They don't see it growing in them until all of a sudden they're in a panic, or they're furious, or they're so sad they don't think they can stand it any longer. They don't see it slowly growing. This practice gets us very, very sensitive to changing mind states in ourselves and to the beginning of mind states. Not initially. There'll still be times when all of a sudden you'll realize, hey, I'm sad. And you hadn't realized it until it's fairly large and full-blown. But the awareness will move back. At the beginning, it will be difficult to catch the very beginning of most mind states. But as soon as we become aware of a mind state that we're experiencing, we note it. When we're working with this mind state, we don't go looking in the body, but we stay available to hearing what our body is saying. And we can go back and forth between noting the mind state and noting things that we become aware that our body is saying to us. In other words, we don't want to, if we're noting the mind state and the awareness of, say, heaviness in the chest comes in, we don't want to try to keep the heaviness on the periphery in order to stay with the mind state. We can move to noting the heaviness. You can move back and forth between noting the mind state itself and noting the physical concomitants of that mind state that come up into your awareness. You should be noting something, either the mind state or the physical, some physical concomitant. You should be noting something about every 5 to 10 seconds, but you can go back and forth between the two. And you can work a couple of minutes within the mind state in its bodily concomitants, and then take your breather back to the breath again. But you can stay a couple of minutes with this. Sometimes it works the other way. We've been watching a body sensation, and we become aware that there's a mind state associated in our awareness. Well, you can go from the body sensation to the mind state that is concomitant with it. Somebody mentioned the hearing of the sound of the car cranking out there an annoyance. Well, you can let that auditory experience move you to noting the annoyance. That might then bring some body things associated with the annoyance. Tension, maybe you're aware you've tightened up against it a little bit, and you can work with the annoyance. Or, as often happens when as I said, when our buried issues start to come up, our own personal issues that aren't a matter of reaction to the immediate environment right now. For example, very common experience during my early retreat work. In fact, I lived a lot with it during my whole first 3-month retreat. A very, very hard knot in my left thigh. You watch a Charlie horse grow and tighten in heart, and great fun. But I soon became aware of feelings that I at first couldn't identify, but a mixture of resentment and powerlessness, and there was a whole complex mind state associated with it, which eventually, when memories started coming, I identified as had to do with my powerlessness in a certain relationship that was far more distressing to me than I was aware of, and I far more wanted control and power than I was aware of wanting. So there's that delicate work back and forth between body and mind state that we get into. As I said, you can go back and forth between these two, but still remember, after a couple of minutes, to take your breather back to the breath, back to your anchor experience. At this point, the practice starts to feel complex for some people. If you get lost or confused, there's one wonderful mind state you can note. You can note confused or confusion and go back to the breath and start again. If you get so confused, You can sit and watch that confusion for a few minutes if you want to, but you can always use the mind state note of confusion when you get overwhelmed by what's going on in the practice and don't know which end is up. This afternoon, I will talk about some specific problem mind states that are called the hindrances. And so there'll be more on mind states this afternoon, but we'll just start with the idea of working with mind states now. Do we need any clarification of the instructions themselves before we start sitting with this?
Did you say something about the detailed analyzing of your mind states to determine where they come from and what causes it?
Yes, I can. Don't get into detailed analyzing. Sometimes we will work through a mind state experience with bodily things associated with it, and it will lift off and go. And if we were later to reflect back on it, we would say, now what was all that about? And we don't have a clue. It doesn't matter. Something was done that needed to be done, and we don't have to know. The wisdom behind the practice knows, and it's in charge. We're not in charge. If we try to be in charge, we mess it up. And that has to do also with this business of a very, very common mistake in early practice and sometimes later practice, one that Easterners don't do as much as Westerners, or so the teachers who teach both Eastern and Western students say. Westerners seem to feel that nothing is really understood or under control or comprehended or fixed unless we've worked it up one side and down the other with thinking about it, with analyzing it, with judging it, with mistake. As soon as you find yourself thinking, and thought will often come in connection with mind states. There's nothing wrong with the thought coming. Sometimes the thought that comes is a memory that it's very good that that memory be released by coming. We see the memory. When the memory comes, we see it. We note thinking. We don't need to do anything else with that memory. At that point, we note the thinking, go back to the breath, because your current experience, which is the thought, it will die. But of course, if you want to hold on to that memory, it'll keep rising and dying. But you've seen it. That's all you need to do. You've seen the memory. You let go of the memory. You go back to the breath. Quite likely, if you're working a very deep, important issue, you'll go right out to that complex of things again. But we have to let go of the thought, whether it's a memory, analyzing, judging. We have to let go of the thought immediately. Otherwise, what will happen, we will go into doing exactly how we usually manage our difficult emotions in ordinary life. We are swamped by them, we're overwhelmed by them, and when we can get in there with our mind a little bit, we start analyzing and thinking, and eventually, or we try to distract ourselves, or we shove it back down, all of which we know doesn't work because the issue comes back up again some other day to haunt us. This way of working with it, just simply watching it mindfully, noting it, letting it continue to rise and be worked with as often as it wants to, resisting the temptation to leap in with this tool called our intellect or our reasoning, which works wonderfully in problem solving in the external world, but does very little good for us when it comes to our own unfinished business. Being willing to let go of it. The question about emptying, we empty ourselves of our own desire to manipulate and control with our mind. That's another thing we're emptying ourselves of. The attachment that we have to our own thinking process is incredible. And maybe some of you have already seen that. We get so attached to our own thoughts. To let go of those and not want to continue to grind round on them, a tremendous emptying, a tremendous renunciation, a tremendous helpful ascetic practice to be willing to let go of the thought. The memory. Now, the analyzing and the judging is a problem. The memory. If the memory comes and you want to go into it, you want to relive it, you want to replay it, you want to turn it over this side, that side, you want to see what else you can add to it, you're no longer meditating when you do that. You're doing the same kind of operation that you've used out there in ordinary life to deal with a lot of your problems that is simply not effective in the way the practice is. We get in there and start putting our own stuff on top of our experience that way. We cut off the process of the practice. We don't let the practice do for us what it's trying to do for us. The memories that come, it's important that we see them. We've seen them when they come. We don't have to do anything else with them. St. John of the Cross says something that's very related here in a way. He says when God chooses to give us a grace, and the grace can be the release of an important memory, when God chooses to give us a grace, the grace and everything that it wants to do for us is there in the minute that it comes. He said, we add nothing to what we've been given if we put our own work on top of it. Hey, we just can't do the job as well as the practice can. It's surrender, it's trust, it's emptying. If you really want to let the practice do for you what it can do for you.
I assume that we're always in a mind state.
The only time that we are not in a mind state, according to the Buddhist psychology, and I think this translates well to the Christian psychology, is when we're in that direct experience of Nibbana or God. There's no mind state there.
Are you suggesting that we, in this practice, that we're beginning to try to discover what mind state we're in? Are we just going to go and if it comes to us, it comes to us?
We don't go looking for mind states, just like we don't go looking for any other experience. But it will come. The awareness will, our attention will sometimes be drawn to the mind state that we're experiencing. And as our experience gets subtler and subtler, we're drawn to the awareness of subtler and subtler mind states.
Well, I've noticed, too, in the sense of I'm expecting the bell.
Expecting is a mind state, and that's to be noted. If you hear me switch the tape recorder back on, and that sets up an expecting of the bell, if you're aware, your mind has gone to awareness of that mind state of expecting, note it.
Yeah, and aversion. There's certain things I don't like about my posture. But now, those are kind of simple ones. Would you suggest you start with whatever is the most obvious mind state that you have that's there?
We note what our awareness is drawn to. Don't go looking. Those are things that have come into your awareness. You note them. The practice is so simple, and we don't need to complicate it. No, look, the whole practice can be reduced to we become aware of an experience because our awareness has gone to a particular experience, an experience of body, of some kind of sensation, of a mind state. Our awareness goes to a particular experience. We note that experience. We watch and see what happens. That's the whole of the practice in a nutshell. So simple. Don't make it more complicated than it is. It is so simple. In the Buddhist psychology, there are four really real realities. One is Nibbana, which we would call God. That's the unconditioned, the unborn, the undying, etc. There are three conditioned realities, and these three conditioned realities mean that they are dependent on causes, and they come when certain causes that feed them draw them forth. These three conditioned realities are consciousness, which is the knowing faculty, and consciousness comes into being whenever there's a graspable experience that impinges on awareness in a way that can be grasped. There's matter, our experience of the body, sensations, and all of these things, the objects that our senses pick up, our material reality, and mind states. Those are the three conditioned realities. And in the Buddhist psychology, that's all there is. There's Nibbana, the unconditioned reality, and there are the three conditioned realities, consciousness, matter, and mind states. That's it. And this is what we watch in the practice. Consciousness, matter, and mind states, because there's sometimes you watch the knowing faculty itself, but that's more subtle. Comes later. We watch those things, and in faithfully watching those things at deeper and deeper and deeper levels of experience, eventually there's the unconditioned reality. I think we better sit. Be sure to attend to the bell when you hear it.